I'm Delisa Smith, and let me tell you a story. My story. Not the version my ex-husband's colleagues heard at cocktail parties, or the one whispered behind manicured hands at charity luncheons. No, this is the real version. The one that started with a single email at 7:15 a.m. and ended with a police cruiser pulling into our lake house driveway, lights flashing. 5 years ago, I was a wife, a new mother, and the founder of a growing, ethical fashion brand. I believed in love, in partnership, in building a future together. I also believed, foolishly, that sharing my success with the man I married was safe. Turns out, betrayal doesn't come wrapped in storm clouds or warning sirens. It arrives quietly, in subject lines like moving on, in smiles that don't reach the eyes, in weekend business trips that smell like cheap perfume and lake water. I used to think that people broke slowly, one crack at a time, but I shattered all at once. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's a story of reclaiming what's mine. My name, my daughter, my company, and my voice. So if you're ready, I'll show you how a man tried to take everything from me and how I took it all back, piece by calculated piece. Moving on, that was the subject line, 2 words, cold, clinical, final. I was holding my coffee in one hand and Emma's spoon in the other when it came through. It was barely 7:15 a.m. The morning sunlight was spilling across our kitchen counter, making everything look deceptively calm. My 1-year-old daughter was babbling happily in her high chair, her fingers covered in mashed banana. For a second, I thought it might be spam. Then I saw the sender's name, Mark Smith. My husband. With a single tap, I opened the email that fractured the life I thought we'd built together. There was no greeting, no explanation, just an attachment. A photo. Mark, my husband of 5 years, standing in front of our lake house with a young blonde woman I'd never seen in real life, but had glimpsed once or twice on his social media feed. Savannah Blake. She couldn't have been older than 23. She was wearing my white cashmere sweater. My necklace. She had her arm looped through his like she belonged there. The house is mine now, the email read. I've already moved in with Savannah. My lawyer will be sending over the divorce papers. Don't bother fighting it. The deed is in my name. I remember setting my coffee down. My hands weren't shaking from fear. It wasn't sadness either. It was something colder, steadier, rage. Not the screaming, glass-shattering kind, the kind that runs quiet and deep, like a fault line before an earthquake. I looked up at Emma, still chewing happily, unaware that her father had just tried to wipe her future clean. The lake house, the one I had purchased entirely with profits from my company, was gone. The money I had worked years to earn, the weekends I sacrificed, the late nights in front of my laptop while I was pregnant with Emma, he had erased it all with an email. I glanced at the framed photo above the sink. Our wedding day. Mark was beaming in that picture, gripping my hand as if nothing in the world could shake us. The same hand that had signed the purchase documents for that house. The same hand that had pored over financial spreadsheets while he was finding himself through consulting gigs. "Are you serious?" I whispered aloud to no one but myself. Then I picked up my phone. Mark's contact photo, smiling, charming, all dimples and white teeth, lit up my screen. I pressed down and hit block. Then I opened my email and typed 2 lines. "Are you sure about that? Better check the paperwork carefully, Delisa." I hit send. Then I blocked his email address too. He thought I was stupid. He always had. He thought I was the agreeable wife, the one who kept the books, packed the bags, ran the company like a cute little shop, and smiled at the right dinner parties. He thought I'd crumble. Cry. Maybe beg him to reconsider. What he forgot was that I didn't build a successful fashion brand from nothing by being weak. I walked over to Emma and picked her up, her little arms wrapped around my neck instinctively. She smelled like baby shampoo and banana, clean and soft and good. She had his eyes, but I prayed to every god that ever existed she didn't have a sense of entitlement. This isn't just about me anymore. I whispered into her hair. "You're going to have the future you deserve. And I'll make sure of it." Back in my office, I opened the drawer of my filing cabinet, the locked one Mark never paid attention to. Inside were purchase receipts, lawyer correspondence, and most importantly, the asset protection contracts I had signed 3 years ago. I had always known Mark wasn't as invested in the business as he pretended, so when he insisted his name be added to the lake house deed for tax purposes, I agreed. On paper, but I also had my lawyer, Sarah Kramer, draft an override clause, one that clearly stated the funds used to purchase the property came from my company and that any attempt to transfer or liquidate without my consent would be considered fraudulent asset conversion. Mark hadn't read the fine print. He never did. I pulled out the document and smiled for the first time that morning. I scanned the legal document again, making sure every clause was still intact. Sarah had warned me back then, when Mark first suggested the joint deed, that mixing personal and business assets with someone like him was asking for trouble. He smiles too much when he talks about money. And I had smiled too because I'd already taken precautions. The clause was airtight. The property had been purchased using my LLC's funds. The money trail was clean, documented, and logged through 3 separate transfers for tax visibility. If Mark tried to sell or claim it, the law would come down on him. Hard. But I wasn't going to tell him that. Not yet. He needed to believe he'd won. I set the file aside and opened another drawer, this one smaller and fireproof. Inside was a small hard drive labeled Backups Personal/Company. I plugged it into my laptop and accessed the folder titled Lake House, Security Feed. Months ago, I'd had cameras discreetly installed, more for peace of mind than suspicion. I hadn't told Mark. Why would I? He never spent more than a weekend there working on big deals. Turns out he'd been working on something. Just not for us. The footage loaded slowly, frame by frame. At first, it was just Mark coming and going at odd hours. Then Savannah appeared. She made herself comfortable quickly, lounging on the porch swing I'd picked out, sipping wine from the glasses I'd inherited from my grandmother. She wore my robe, cooked in my kitchen, slept in my bed. In one clip, she was holding Emma's stuffed giraffe. That broke me. I slammed the laptop shut, breathing hard, eyes stinging. I hadn't cried yet. Not when I saw the email. Not when I realized the money was gone. Not even when I blocked the man I once promised forever to. But this violation of space, of memory, of motherhood, it cut deeper. After a long moment, I reopened the laptop and hit download all. Every clip, every timestamp. I sent them in a folder to Sarah with the subject line, Evidence, Urgent. While the files uploaded, I glanced at the clock. 9:04 a.m. Emma was down for her nap. Rachel would be arriving soon. And I had a long list of things to do. At the top of that list, find out where the hell the money went. I opened my banking app and scrolled to our joint savings account. The one labeled Smith Family College Fund. Balance. $0, 0 cents. A transfer had been initiated yesterday morning to an account I didn't recognize. When I clicked the account number, it was flagged as offshore jurisdiction. My chest tightened. Nearly $100,000, 0 cents, gone. Not just stolen, laundered. Shifted somewhere out of reach. For what? A diamond ring, a down payment for their new life, a safety net in case I fought back. I wasn't just dealing with a broken marriage, I was dealing with financial fraud. My phone buzzed. Rachel! I answered on speaker while still staring at the screen. Dalisa, she said, breathless. You need to see this. I'm sending you something now. Seconds later, an image popped up. A screenshot from Savannah Blake's Instagram. There she was again, radiant and smug, standing at the lake house holding a key with the caption, Home Sweet Home with my love, new beginnings. I scrolled down. Another photo, her lying in my bed in my sweater. The caption, nothing better than weekend cuddles in our new place. The most recent image hit harder than the rest. Savannah, flashing a familiar ring. My everything gave me this today. Can't wait to build our forever. It was my grandmother's ring. The one Mark had promised would go to Emma on her 18th birthday. My voice cracked. He gave her that ring? Rachel was silent for a beat. Delisa? She's been posting photos like this for months. Some go back to before Emma was even born. I froze. What? She's been at the lake house since early last year. The timestamps match the weekends he claimed to be away for merger meetings. He's been building this double life for longer than we thought. The room spun for a moment. While I was up at 3 a.m. feeding our newborn, he was playing house with a girl barely out of college. While I was managing our payroll and packaging holiday orders, he was giving away my family's legacy to someone who didn't even know how to use a washing machine without asking Alexa. This wasn't an affair, it was a takeover. Forward me everything, I said, voice low. Every photo, every caption, every comment. Rachel hesitated. There's one more thing. I braced myself. What is it? Check your business inbox, she said. He's coming after the company, too. I turned to my desktop and clicked open my work email. The subject line stared back at me like a loaded gun. Emergency petition, financial disclosure request from Mark's attorney. He was trying to take my company. My cursor hovered over the email as my jaw tightened. You bastard! And then another notification, this time from my security system. Motion detected, lake house. Front door. I clicked the feed, and there he was. Mark, back at my house. And he wasn't alone. Some women scream, some beg. I poured myself another cup of coffee and called my lawyer. I had expected this. Maybe not the depth of his betrayal or the audacity of trying to take the company I built before he could spell EBITDA, but the storm? I'd been bracing for that since the day Mark Smith asked to be added to my property deed with that winning smile and a half-baked excuse about tax optimization. It was never about taxes, it was about control, and he thought I wouldn't notice. Sarah Kramer picked up on the second ring. Dalisa. I didn't bother with pleasantries. He filed for financial disclosure. They're coming for the company. She sighed, but not in surprise. I had a feeling. What else? I sent over the video feeds, the emails, the Instagram screenshots. I knew Sarah would sort through them with her usual icy precision. Former prosecutor turned corporate litigator, Sarah had a gift for weaponizing silence. She didn't talk to fill space. She talked to dismantle your defense. There's enough here for a restraining order, she said, and if they try to touch your business accounts, we'll respond with a motion for injunctive relief. Do you still have the original funding documents? I already had the folder open. All of them? Time-stamped, notarized, bank-stamped, and backed up twice. Sarah whistled low. I love how you think. But it wasn't foresight, it was muscle memory, honed from years of being underestimated. Mark had always told people he helped me turn my little online shop into a real company. What he left out was that by the time we got married, I already had 3 warehouses, 12 employees, contracts with 2 national retailers. I had built Smith & Co. from nothing while he bounced from one failed startup to another, changing job titles like socks. He liked to call himself a strategic advisor. What he really was decoration. Still, I let him have his narrative. I didn't need to correct him. I was too busy growing my empire while he played house. Until now. I heard Emma crying upstairs, her nap cut short. Rachel had just arrived and was already climbing the stairs with her usual calm. Take your time, she called down. We're fine up here. I nodded and returned to my desk. This was war, and wars were won in silence first. I started building a timeline. Every instance of financial transfer from our joint accounts, every suspicious email from Mark's old work laptop I still had access to. Sarah had once told me, judges don't care about your feelings, they care about paper trails. So I gave them one. While compiling documents, another thought hit me. Savannah. She wasn't just some pretty distraction. She was an accomplice. I needed to know more. I opened a private browser and pulled up her social media again. Instagram was filled with curated snapshots of luxury and filtered joy. Posing on the lake deck with wine, wearing designer bags I recognized from my collection, and tagging Mark in a series of subtle love notes. But it was her Facebook that broke the facade. Most of her profile was private, but her photos of you section revealed far more. She'd been tagged in posts by friends, captions like, "My girl Sav landed a big one, old money and all. Wait until wifey finds out she's been funding her replacement." I screenshot everything, even the private comments visible through tag loopholes. Then Rachel's voice floated down again. "Delisa, you might want to see this." I climbed the stairs and found her in the nursery, and was calm again, playing with her plush elephant, while Rachel held up her tablet with a grim expression. "She made TikToks," Rachel said, tapping to play. Savannah, posing in my mirror, doing a get ready with me in my clothes, lip-syncing to some pop song while Mark's voice called out from another room, "Babe, we're going to be late." The hashtags were worse. Lake House Life, CFO Wife, Manifesting Money, Rich Girls Club. "She's not just showing off," I muttered. "She's documenting theft." Rachel nodded. "They think this is a game, but..." I was done playing. I sat beside Emma and took her tiny hand in mine. I had to protect her from this circus, from the legacy of lies her father was building. "I'm not the woman they thought I was," I said quietly, because the woman they underestimated was about to dismantle their entire world. I spent the rest of the afternoon turning their arrogance into ammunition. Savannah and Mark had documented everything. The clothes she wore, the wine she drank, the bed she slept in. All mine, and thanks to their social media oversharing, I had timestamps, GPS tags, and a running commentary of their fairy tale built on theft. By 3 p.m., Sarah had reviewed the evidence folder I sent and responded with a simple message. "This is gold. Proceeding with an emergency motion for injunctive relief. Will file by morning." I sat back in my chair, taking in the quiet hum of my office. The air smelled faintly of lavender oil and printer ink. My laptop was warm against my legs. It was a strange contrast, the chaos I was navigating and the calm around me. But I'd learned long ago that peace was not the absence of pressure. It was knowing where your firepower was buried. And mine wasn't documentation. While Rachel prepped a backup server off-site, I turned my attention to something I hadn't yet opened. The last shared folder from Mark's laptop, synced months ago when we still pretended to be partners. I almost didn't look. I almost told myself I'd seen enough. But then I clicked. Inside were PDFs, spreadsheets, memos. At first glance, nothing unusual until I spotted a subfolder labeled Bridgewater Merger Internal Notes. Bridgewater was one of my company's biggest competitors. I opened one document. It was a breakdown of my vendor pricing model, confidential supply chain contacts, even estimated quarterly growth for next year. Numbers that had never left my executive team, information Mark had no business accessing. I scrolled faster. Another document. Projected collapse scenario, if Delisa refuses partnership. It was a playbook. A blueprint for bleeding my company dry. He'd been preparing for this merger, not just as a promotion strategy. He'd planned to weaponize our marriage, my trust, my access, my files, for a corporate ambush. I felt my blood chill. Not just betrayal, but strategic dismantling. And Robert, his CEO, Savannah's uncle, was in on it. I messaged Sarah. Found confidential files tied to Bridgewater merger, contain proprietary company data, possible corporate espionage. She replied within minutes. "Prepare everything. I'm flying down tomorrow." I looked over at the baby monitor. Emma was napping again, her breathing soft and even. She had no idea the world was tilting beneath her crib, and then I remembered something I hadn't checked. I navigated to my business server activity logs. Rachel had set up a monitoring system weeks ago after a phishing attempt. I scrolled to recent entries. There it was. Multiple failed login attempts from an external IP Mark's laptop, timestamped just days ago. He'd tried to access my company's backend again, probably thinking I'd never notice. He didn't know that my systems were laced with traps. Any unauthorized login attempt triggered a silent alert and logged the MAC address. I sent the entire packet to Sarah. Just as I was about to close the laptop, another message came through. This time from Rachel. Check Amber's Facebook. Something's changed. I frowned. Amber? No, Savannah. Why would she? But then I clicked. Savannah's name was Savannah Blake Wells. Her full profile now included a line I hadn't noticed before. Niece to Robert Blake, CEO of Bridgewater Holdings, engaged to Mark Smith, incoming CFO, and just below that, a post from today, a photo of the two of them, smiling, holding a champagne bottle with the caption, celebrating our next chapter. Promotion day tomorrow for my future husband. Couldn't have done it without Uncle Rob. Power moves, power moves. Suddenly, it all clicked. They weren't just building a life together. They were building a takeover, a hostile one. And the final piece slid into place when I saw the comment below the post, one I nearly missed. Glad everything's going according to plan. She has no idea what's coming. Posted by Daniel Cortez. Daniel, my chief financial officer. My stomach twisted. He was my CFO, not theirs. Or so I thought. Some people wait for justice. I prefer to build it myself, one documented betrayal at a time. By dawn the next morning, I had barely slept. Not out of fear, but from the electric clarity that only comes when your fight or flight response has evolved into something colder, smarter. Strategy. There was something strangely empowering about watching it all fall apart. From a distance, on my terms. Mark thought he'd pulled the rug out from under me, but what he didn't realize was I'd built the floor beneath it. The moment I saw Daniel Cortez's name under Savannah's post, something inside me clicked. Not panic, but confirmation. I had suspected a leak for months, an inefficiency I couldn't quite trace. And now, I had a name, a motive, a trail. He had access to everything, our financial forecasts, vendor lists, tax documents. He'd been with Smith & Co. since year 2. I had brought him in when no one else would, after he was let go from a tech startup over internal conflict. I thought I was giving him a second chance. Turns out I was handing him a key. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I called Rachel and asked her to begin pulling Daniel's access logs. Quietly. She knew the drill. Logins, file transfers, IP addresses, print jobs, and any connection between his work and Bridgewater Holdings. I needed patterns, I needed timestamps, and I needed undeniable proof. While she worked, I drove Emma to my sister's house across town. Melissa was my only family who hadn't taken Mark's side when things began to unravel. She wasn't thrilled about becoming emergency childcare, but she also understood that this wasn't just a messy divorce. This feels like war, she said, as I passed Emma's overnight bag into her arms. It is, I replied. And I'm not losing this one. By 10 a.m., I was back in my office with Sarah Kramer sitting across from me, sleeves rolled up, laptop open, and a fire in her eyes that matched mine. I've reviewed everything, she said. You have enough to freeze the lake house, block access to your company's accounts, and file for emergency injunction. I nodded. We go public? Not yet, Sarah said. We wait until they're too deep to claw their way out. I liked the way she thought. We began. Mapping out a response timeline. File an emergency injunction by Friday morning. Issue a cease and desist to Robert Blake and Bridgewater Holdings. Prepare an official report to send to the board of directors. Submit evidence of corporate espionage to the state attorney general's office. It wasn't just about protecting my company anymore. It was about making sure no other woman, no other founder, ever had to face this kind of betrayal without recourse. While Sarah drafted motions, I returned to the server. Rachel had already flagged Daniel's activity. Unusual logging times from outside IPs. Multiple downloads of vendor contracts. One large upload to a personal cloud account at 2:13 a.m. the night before Mark's first merger trip. It was all there. The map of betrayal, the blueprint. Ironically, Daniel had named the upload folder Final Merge. It would be poetic, I thought, if that became his last login. I stared at the evidence, trying to decide what to feel. Anger, disappointment, hurt. But all I felt was ready. This wasn't personal anymore. It was procedural. Document, file, execute. Like a hostile takeover, except I wasn't the one being swallowed. Sarah looked up from her screen. "You know what I love about this?" "What?" "They thought you'd be soft." I almost laughed. They're about to learn how sharp softness can cut. At that moment, Rachel called down from the other room. "Delisa, you'll want to see this, the lake house feed." He's back. I stood, every muscle coiled. "Mark," she nodded. "And Savannah, and Robert." Of course, the triumvirate of arrogance. They had no idea the storm they'd stepped into. I followed her into the surveillance room. The live feed blinked onto the screen. There they were, laughing, sipping champagne in my living room, surrounded by my furniture, standing beneath my grandmother's painting like they owned it. Mark raised his glass. "To the future CFO of Bridgewater Holdings." Savannah giggled. "To my husband, the genius." And then Robert chimed in, his voice crisp and cruel. "And to the woman who doesn't know what's about to hit her." I leaned in closer, watching the smugness on their faces. "They have no idea," I whispered. Sarah crossed her arms. "Are we sending the email?" I didn't hesitate. "Not yet. Let them toast. We send it after the next glass." I didn't blink. Not as they raised their glasses, not as Savannah kissed Mark's cheek with staged adoration, not even when Robert Blake leaned forward and whispered, "By this time tomorrow, we'll control her entire company, right down to the email signature." I only reached for the remote and turned up the audio feed. It was crystal clear. They didn't know I had installed microphones, too. Hidden in the baseboards installed 6 months ago when I started sensing something wasn't right with Mark's solo retreats. The cameras caught everything. But the audio, that was the nail in the coffin. "I'm telling you," Mark said, swirling his wine, "Delisa doesn't even suspect Daniel. She still trusts him like a brother." Savannah laughed. "She should have trusted you less." "She'll fold," Robert added. "Once the board sees those audit flags and we pressure her on the vendor delays, she'll think she's got no choice but to merge." Mark clinked his glass. "That's when we'll buy her out." Cheap. I didn't move. My pulse didn't spike. My breath stayed even. Because this was confirmation. Not paranoia, not guessing, not circumstantial. This was confession, and it was recorded. I turned to Sarah. Her expression was sharp enough to draw blood. "Let's draft the board email," I said. "Attach the footage?" "No," I said. "Not yet. Let them squirm. We send the email first. Let it arrive while they're still toasting." Sarah smiled grimly. "Classy." I walked back to my desk and opened a blank email. Subject line: "Confidential legal concern involving CFO candidate body. To the board of directors, please find enclosed preliminary evidence suggesting deliberate corporate misconduct involving Mark Smith and members of Bridgewater Holdings, including but not limited to unauthorized access to proprietary information, fraudulent use of shared business assets, and attempts to compromise Smith & Co. through insider collaboration. Additional files, including surveillance footage and metadata logs, are available upon request and will be submitted as part of a formal complaint to the Attorney General. Delisa Smith, founder and CEO, Smith & Co." Sarah double-checked everything. Rachel encrypted the attachments, and with one click, we sent it. I didn't expect fireworks. Not yet. The board would take time to process, to consult legal, to panic, but I wasn't done. I walked back to the feed. Mark was now pacing the living room on his phone. His smile faded. He checked his inbox, and then I watched his expression shift. Confidence draining, confusion taking its place. He was reading the email. "Something wrong, babe?" Savannah asked. Mark didn't answer. Robert pulled out his phone, too. "Wait, why are we getting pings from the general counsel?" They were unraveling, on camera, in real time. Rachel chuckled beside me. "Better than cable." But then something happened that made my stomach twist. Mark walked to the home office, my office. He sat down at my desk and opened my laptop and started typing. "What's he doing?" I asked sharply. Rachel checked the system. "Hold on. He's trying to access your business servers again." "What?" Sarah snapped. "He's in the clone environment," Rachel said. "The decoy system we set up last week. He thinks it's the real thing. We had designed it to look like the actual backend file structure, folder names, even dummy invoices, but every click he made was being logged, every search term flagged, every attempt to export was nothing but data going into our evidence vault." "Let him think he's winning," I said. We watched in silence as he scrolled, copied, downloaded, building what he thought was a bulletproof case to bury me. I waited 10 minutes. Long enough for the email to circulate, long enough for legal counsel to escalate it, long enough for someone to whisper that the woman he underestimated had receipts. Then Sarah looked up from her phone. "The board just called an emergency meeting. No prior notice, no agenda." I exhaled slowly. That's our moment. We watched the camera as Robert's phone lit up. He answered, his face paling within seconds. "What do you mean, legal flagged me? Who sent what footage?" And then, right on cue, Savannah's phone exploded with alerts. Notifications, tags, a dozen screenshots of her private messages, somehow sent to every board member at once. The ones where she bragged about helping Mark steal access, the ones where she mocked me. Mark stood frozen. "What did you do?" he hissed at her. I didn't post anything," Robert growled. "We've been set up." "No," I thought. "You were warned. You just didn't listen." I turned to Rachel. "Send the second file." She hit upload. The live feed flickered. In the corner of the screen, we watched the three of them panic, shouting over each other, pointing fingers, and then sirens. Not distant. Right outside the lake house. Red and blue lights flashed through the window as two black and white patrol cars pulled up the gravel drive. The last image we saw before the feed cut. Mark being pulled away in handcuffs, screaming, "This house is mine." It's a strange thing watching a man fall apart in real time. Especially when the walls he built came crashing down, not from outside pressure, but from the rot inside. Mark Smith always thought he was untouchable. He carried himself like a man immune to consequence. Back straight, smile polished, suit always a half size too tight, like he needed the world to see how hard he worked for his illusion of power. But no tailored blazer could save him when the cuffs clicked shut. The image of him, mouth open mid-denial, wrists behind his back as the police escorted him out of the lake house, will be burned into my memory forever. Not because it was satisfying, though it was, but because it was symbolic. That house had been his throne. Now it was his crime scene. Savannah stood frozen, mascara streaking down her face as officers moved through the living room. Robert Blake, usually so composed, shouted into his phone about legal overreach, about misunderstanding, about fixing this quietly, but no one was listening. The only voices that mattered now were the ones in the emails, the videos, the files we just handed to the authorities. And mine, because for the first time in years I had the room, and they were all finally fatally silent. Back in Nashville, I sat in my home office, the security feed still open, though the live stream had cut to a blank screen with a timestamp in the corner. 11:12. IMM. That was the minute it all began to collapse. Sarah leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, her phone buzzing every few seconds. Board members, lawyers, reporters, already sniffing the edges of scandal. "It's going viral," she said quietly. "A leak from the courthouse. Someone saw Mark in cuffs. It's already trending on Twitter." I almost laughed. Hashtag, she grinned. Lakehouse CFO, poetic justice, was trending. I stood and crossed to the window. The neighborhood outside was still, peaceful. It felt surreal how unchanged the world looked when everything inside me was rewired. I was no longer reacting. I was orchestrating. "Rachel," I said, turning back. "Get me the full asset list tied to the lake house. Everything purchased under the company account." She nodded, already typing. "You're thinking criminal misappropriation?" "I'm thinking leverage," I replied, because Mark hadn't just stolen memories. He'd taken business assets. The furniture, the artwork, the wine cellar inventory, the limited edition Decker bought as part of a marketing collaboration. Every single piece logged and accounted for, all of it company property, which meant he hadn't just betrayed me. He had defrauded the business. Rachel handed me the first list of flagged items. "You're going to want to see this." At the top of the page, 3 canvases valued at $42,000, 0 cents. Signed under my company's tax ID, purchased through an exclusive partnership deal with a boutique artist in Charleston. "All of them are in the living room," she said, right where the officers were standing. Right where the cameras had caught Mark and Robert clinking glasses. Sarah looked up. "This is enough to make the theft count stick." "Let's make sure the IRS sees it too," I said. Just then, my phone buzzed again. A message from a blocked number. No name, no subject. I opened it. It was a photo, grainy, clearly taken from inside a conference room. Mark, Robert, and Daniel Cortez. But this wasn't old. The timestamp showed yesterday, hours before Mark was arrested. The message attached read, "He wasn't acting." Aloud, "Ask Daniel what he signed at Bridgewater." My throat tightened. Daniel. My CFO. My once right hand. The man I hadn't confronted yet because I thought I had time. I looked at Rachel. "Pull every document Daniel sent or received from Bridgewater Holdings in the last 90 days. Sarah narrowed her eyes. "You think he's still in it?" "I think," I said slowly, "that I've only cut off the tail of the serpent, and now it was time to go for the head." Daniel Cortez always knew how to stay just far enough in the background to be useful, but never quite visible enough to be questioned. I used to admire that about him. Now I knew better. While the headlines raged about Mark's arrest, from CFO candidate to cuffed in a day, and Savannah deactivated all her social media accounts within hours of going viral, I turned inward. Not emotionally. Strategically. Because if that anonymous photo was right and Daniel had signed something behind my back, then what we'd seen at the lake house was just the collapse of the front. The real breach had always been inside Smith & Co. I paced my office as Rachel dug into the server logs. Her fingers flew across the keyboard like they were racing my pulse. On the far wall, the security feeds had gone quiet. Empty rooms, empty glasses. But I didn't need cameras now. I needed paper trails. "Got something," Rachel said. I turned. "Tell me." Daniel forwarded a series of internal files from his company email to a personal Gmail account 3 weeks ago. They're labeled innocently budget drafts, contract templates, but one of them contains the projected product launch schedule for Q3. My jaw tightened. "That's confidential IP." "Exactly," she nodded. "Also, one of the documents contains edits from a Bridgewater Holdings domain. The file metadata shows it was modified using their corporate Google account. That was it. The final line connecting dots I had been sketching in the dark. I sent the data to Sarah instantly. Within minutes, she called me back, her voice razor sharp. "Delisa, this isn't just breach of trust. It's corporate espionage, verified and traceable. We need to act now." "What? The move?" I asked. We freeze his access, initiate legal separation from his employment, and we prepare a formal notice to the board that the internal compromise has been contained and isolated, but she hesitated. Dalissa, we can't be the ones to fire him. Not yet. I raised an eyebrow. Why not? Because if we do, we risk looking like we're covering our tracks. The smarter play is to let the board call for an emergency session to review his standing. We present the evidence to them and they terminate him. Publicly, cleanly. No retaliation, no loopholes. I didn't argue. I trusted Sarah when it came to strategic cruelty. Rachel prepped the files while I rehearsed my message to the board. Short, measured, lethal. Subject: urgent concern regarding CFO conduct body. Please see attached evidence suggesting breach of fiduciary duty, data leakage, and unauthorized collaboration with Bridgewater Holdings. Recommendation: emergency session to review Daniel Cortez's role and security clearance within Smith & Co. Alisa Smith. I paused before hitting send. Then I added one more line: for the integrity of this company and those who built it from nothing. And I clicked. By late afternoon, the board had responded. An emergency virtual session was scheduled for 9:00 a.m. the next day. Daniel, unaware, was still working remotely, emailing, replying, reviewing invoices like nothing had changed. I watched him through the system's passive activity monitor. Mark had underestimated me because of ego. Daniel, because of proximity. He mistook closeness for immunity. But there's something Mark never understood. Something Daniel was about to learn. The closer you stand to the fire, the faster you burn. That night, I couldn't sleep. Emma lay curled up in her crib, breathing evenly, her small hand gripping her stuffed elephant. I watched her through the monitor, grateful she wouldn't remember any of this. I sat on the couch downstairs, staring out into the quiet Nashville night, when my phone buzzed again. Blocked number, no message, just a file. It was a scanned document. A signed agreement between Bridgewater Holdings and a shell LLC I'd never heard of. The signature at the bottom made my stomach drop. Daniel Cortez. And those below his name, in small print, the LLC's parent company was listed, Savannah Blake Holdings. You think the worst thing someone can do is betray your trust. But what if it's deeper than that? What if they rewrite your history? I didn't sleep after the Savannah document hit my inbox. I didn't cry either. There was no time for emotion now, just calculation. By dawn, I was already in the archives. Most executives don't even know the lower level of the Smith building exists. A sub-basement, technically off-record, used decades ago for physical file storage before everything went digital. A place my grandfather insisted on preserving. Real power, he used to say, is hidden in paper, not pixels. The motion-activated lights flickered to life, revealing rows of steel cabinets, some covered in dust thick enough to trace initials in. The air smelled of mildew, old ink, and something faintly coppery, like blood sealed behind time. I pulled open drawer after drawer, hunting for incorporation files. I didn't know what exactly I was looking for, but I knew Savannah hadn't operated alone. That LLC she used, it wasn't new, its signature matched older records. Someone had been preparing this trap for years. Then I saw it. A file labeled Founding Signatories, Smith Acquisition 1982, a deal my father had always referenced as the turning point. I opened it, and my heart dropped. Among the founding names wasn't just Charles Smith, my father. There was another signature, Margaret T. Keller. I blinked. That name wasn't unfamiliar, not because I'd seen it in any business directory, because I'd heard it whispered in one of my mother's old voicemails. Left unplayed for decades, trapped on a dusty answering machine in the attic. A voicemail she'd never meant for me to hear, a woman named Margaret. She called herself family, but not by name. I took a photo of the signature and stuffed the folder into my leather tote. My pulse was pounding. Every bone in my body told me this wasn't just corporate betrayal anymore. This was bloodline betrayal. I left the archive and drove to the last place I thought I'd go again, the nursing home on the edge of Davidson County. Her name was Judith Turner, but I had always called her Aunt Judy, though we weren't related. She'd worked for my family for over 30 years before quietly retiring after my mother's death. Most people thought she'd gone to Florida, but I knew better. Judy never chased sunshine, she chased shadows. She recognized me the moment I walked into the visitor's lounge. "You look just like your mother when you're angry," she said without needing my name. I sat across from her, feeling both 8 and 38 at the same time. "Judy, I need to know the truth about Margaret Keller and why her name is on founding documents for Smith & Co." Judy didn't answer immediately. Her eyes darted to the hallway, then back to me. "She was your mother's half-sister. Eleanor's blood, not your father's. But they didn't grow up together." "What happened?" Her grandfather had 2 families, one public, one hidden. Margaret was the secret daughter. He brought her in for one deal, one that would benefit the clean Smith name, then erased her. No one was supposed to know. Then why is she back? Why now? Judy leaned forward. Her voice dropped. "Because she had a daughter too. Raised under another name, quiet, patient, and she's the one working with Savannah." I stared at her. "You're saying Savannah is—" "I'm saying Savannah Blake isn't who she pretends to be." The world tilted. I had always assumed Savannah was just a petty opportunist, latching onto Mark for access, for validation, but if she was Margaret's daughter, then she was a Smith by blood, which meant she wasn't infiltrating the company, she was reclaiming it. I drove home in silence, the Tennessee sky folding into dusk above me, clouds swollen with rain that never fell. Savannah wasn't an outsider after all, she was one of us. One of them. And if that were true, her vengeance had every ounce of legitimacy mine did. Still, the timing was too perfect, too clean. I needed to be sure. Back at the house, I dug into the last place I hadn't looked, my mother's cedar chest. After she passed, no one had touched it, not even Mark, who said it smelled too much like the past. I'd kept it sealed, locked beneath my bed like a sacred tomb, but now every inch of it felt like potential evidence. Inside, folded beneath birth announcements and my childhood drawings, was a yellowed envelope. It had no name, no stamp, just a single line in my mother's elegant handwriting. "For when the lies become unbearable." My breath caught. I unfolded the letter inside. The ink had faded, but the meaning struck clean. "Dalisa, if you're reading this, then you've started to see it. The family we built was always a castle built on bones. Your father and I, we weren't as alone as you thought. Your grandfather had another child, a daughter, Margaret. I wanted to bring her in, I begged him. But he made a deal instead, used her name for one deal, then buried her again. I tried to keep track of her, but she disappeared. If she ever comes back, it won't be for reconciliation. It will be for justice. Love you always, Mom." I sat frozen for a long time. Then slowly I took out my phone and opened Savannah's press photo again. There was something in her chin, her cheekbones. I saw it now. A trace of my mother in her. Blood doesn't lie. The next morning, I made the call. "Savannah Blake, please!" "She's in a meeting. Tell her Dalisa Smith is calling. She'll pick up." 5 seconds later, she did. Her voice was calm. "Well, that was faster than I expected. You could have told me." "I could have, but then you wouldn't have believed me. You needed to find it on your own. You're Margaret Keller's daughter." Silence. Then, "Yes, and I didn't come to destroy your company. I came to take back what was stolen from my mother, from me." I clenched my jaw. "So you manipulated my husband, posed as his savior, All just to sneak in through the back door? You mean like how your grandfather manipulated my mother, used her, discarded her, and erased her from history? I didn't sneak in, I walked into a house. Should have been mine. Her words weren't angry, they were surgical, as if she'd rehearsed them her whole life. You're not gonna get away with this. I already have. Mark signed over his shares to me weeks ago. He's nothing to me now. But you, Dalisa, you're different. You're the only one I respect in this mess. The only one smart enough to see the whole board. What do you want? There was a pause, then she said, lunch at LaRue's. Tomorrow. Noon. You and me. No assistants, no lawyers. She hung up. The next day, I sat across from her in the corner booth of the upscale French bistro, under the low hum of jazz and polished cutlery. Savannah looked every bit the composed heiress, but I wasn't there to admire her polish. I want to make you an offer, she said, cutting into her salmon. Make it fast. I become the public face. You become the silent board chair. We rebuild Smith & Co. together. No lawsuits, no war. And if I refuse? Her smile didn't fade. Then I release the recordings of Mark, of your father, of everything. My fingers tightened around the glass stem. You've had this plan for years. She raised her glass. Decades, actually. I just had to wait for the right generation to unravel. I walked out of LaRue's feeling like the walls of my life had shifted an inch. The woman I thought was my rival wasn't just in the family. She was the reflection of everything my mother had tried to protect me from. But Savannah had made one mistake. She thought I'd fold. She hadn't counted on the fact that I still had my mother's will, a version no one had seen, and inside that safe in my study, behind the false back panel, was a folder marked confidential for Dalisa only. They say some truths set you free, but they forget to mention freedom can burn. I sat alone in my study, the evening light slanting through the window in long amber lines. On the floor before me was the old metal lockbox I'd dragged out from behind the false panel in my bookshelf. It still smelled faintly of cedar and aged paper, like something sacred and dangerous. My hands shook slightly as I turned the key. Inside, nestled between estate documents and letters from my mother, was a thin navy blue folder stamped in gold. Confidential, for Dalisa only. It wasn't just a will, it was a war plan. The alternate version of my mother's testament outlined a clause no one had ever mentioned. Not the family attorney, not the board, not even Mark when he was still pretending to be invested. It detailed an irrevocable trust with my name as the sole beneficiary, set to activate under specific conditions. In the event of corporate misconduct, asset transfer through coercion or any claim against Smith & Co. by external family members. Savannah's very existence triggered every clause. My breath caught. If I filed this now, I could freeze her out. Legally, financially, publicly. But there was more. Tucked at the back of the folder was a sealed letter, dated 6 weeks before my mother died. Her handwriting had grown, frailer, slanted with urgency. Dalsa, I always knew the day might come when you'd have to choose between keeping the peace and telling the truth. If you're reading this, then you've already seen what silence has cost us. You were never meant to carry it alone, but if you do it with eyes wide open. You can expose them, or you can rebuild what's left. But not both. Love always. Mom. I stared at her words until they blurred. Expose them, rebuild. Not both. That was the cost of truth, of legacy, of power. The doorbell rang. Once, then twice. I didn't move right away because I already knew who it was, and I already knew what she had come for. The hallway felt colder than it should have. My feet were bare against the wooden floor, my mind racing ahead of each step. When I opened the door, she was standing there. Savannah, drenched in the golden pink haze of the setting sun, she looked like a mirage, too composed for someone who had set fire to everything I once called home. She didn't wait for an invitation. I assume you've read the file, she said, stepping inside. Her eyes flicked over the envelope still trembling in my hand. It's all coming apart, Delissa. You and I both know it. I closed the door softly behind her. Because you tore it apart. She gave a humorless smile. Don't act so surprised. We both know the Smith Empire was never built on loyalty. Your mother had secrets. So did mine. And now, the vultures are circling. This is survival. I watched her carefully, noting the stiffness in her jaw, the barely concealed desperation behind the cool facade. She wasn't here to gloat. She was here to negotiate. There's a press release scheduled for Monday, she continued, handing me a sleek envelope with the Smith & Co. insignia. You can either be part of the new structure or fight it and lose everything. I let the silence stretch. In my mind, two paths warred with each other. One where I struck back using every clause, every file, every ounce of truth. The other where I walked away, burned the evidence and built something new from the ruins. Alone, but finally free. My mother's letter whispered in my thoughts, expose them or rebuild, but not both. I looked Savannah dead in the eye, and then, quietly, I reached for the fireplace. I tossed the letter inside. Savannah's breath hitched. What are you doing? Ending a war, I said, watching the flames catch. But before the fire swallowed the last of the envelope, a knock came. Firm, deliberate, from the back entrance. That door was reserved for only one person. My father, whom I had buried 10 years ago. Thanks so much for watching Family and Heart Stories. If this story touched you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more heartfelt dramas every week.